Welcome back to the Frog God YouTube channel. Today I have the most anticipated interview slash video that I think it will ever be on this channel, and that's not a joke. The number one comment that I get on these videos, as most of you know, is when are you having on Matt Finch? When's the Matt Finch interview coming? Well, today is the day I got the master himself, the uncle of the D&D world, on the YouTube channel. Thank you very much for joining me, Matt. For those who are unfamiliar, the select few, Matt is the creator of Swords and Wizardry, partner of Frog God Games, and obviously has one of the best, if not the best, interview style YouTube channels where he has on, sort of like the high end guests of the RPG world, which is always a great listen. Obviously, all of his links are down in the description below. But welcome, Matt. Thank you very much for coming on with me. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your very busy days to come talk to me.
Always a pleasure, Ben.
Okay, so we're just going to jump right into it because I know a lot of people have been waiting for this video for a long time, so we won't string you along any longer. First thing I want to mention, though, is we're going to cover a good amount of info in this video without keeping it to a 2-hour video because I know it could easily be like a 2 to 3 hour conversation just about Swords and Wizardry itself. So in the description, you're going to find timestamps to key topics of this video. So if you're more interested in hearing the origin of Swords and Wizardry or about the new Swords and Wizardry game system supplement stuff that's coming out pretty soon, yes, it's official. Check the timestamps in the description down below and you'll be able to jump around to wherever you want in the video. So with that being said, so a lot of people have been asking for new Swords and Wizardry stuff. We're going to go back in time a little bit. First off, I think I want to talk about the origin of Swords and Wizardry, Matt. So if you can give us some insight on sort of how this amazing game system came to be and what your process of that was.
Okay, well, and for that, we actually need to go a little further back in time before Swords and Wizardry.
Let's do it, yeah.
Swords and Wizardry is sort of a mix of a game and a publisher tool. And so the whole retroclone concept began with Osric. And I'll also explain what a retroclone concept is because that's kind of passed by a lot in Swords and Wizardry nowadays because it's such a mature system. In about 2006, we were in a situation where we had 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons out there with the OGL, which meant that people could publish things for 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. And at that time, Wizards of the Coast had a very litigious sort of reputation, which turns out to be unfair. It was a holdover from what TSR did in the 90s, but they had that same reputation out there at that time. And so what Stuart Marshall and I did, along with some other folks from the Knights and Knaves forum, was to put together basically a complete rewrite of 1st edition Dungeons and Dragons. And the first phase of that was just basically the player's handbook plus the rules. And that rewrite was done under the OGL using material from the system reference document so that you would create something that allowed you to publish for 1st edition Dungeons and Dragons, except that you couldn't mention that it was Dungeons and Dragons because that's a trademark and you're not allowed to use a trademark under the OGL. So it's called Osric. And we didn't have too much of a problem with that idea because it was really a publisher's tool. We figured that about 100 people would probably download that and use it for creating modules for AD&D. As it turned out, in the first 24 hours, we had 50,000 downloads of it. And
pretty good.
And so one of the things that we discovered almost instantly was that there were the people who were interested in publishing, but there was a huge number of people who were interested in using it for playing because it was somewhat better organized than the 1st edition books. It was something that if you wanted to introduce people to AD&D, you could send them a free PDF. The other thing is the PDFs of the older editions of the rules were not available at that time. They are now, most of them, on drive-through, but at that time they weren't. And so so that was one of the benefits of Osric. And so Osric was out there. Another couple of retro clones. I should say also, to give props where they're due. A guy named Chris Gonerman was independently working without any knowledge either way on a very similar project with basic D&D, although he did wrap in his house rules more into his project than ours, but his was also an OGL version of an earlier edition. So that retro clone concept is sort of independently shared by me and Stuart Marshall, and also Chris Gonnerman.
Yeah.
And he gets a lot less credit for that, probably just because he's less loud in social media, but he definitely gets credit for that as well. And so some other retro clones got made after that. And then in 2008, I think it was, I came out with Swords and Wizardry, which was the original 3 books of original D&D, the ones that came in the box.
Yep.
Plus, I included in the first version of it, I also included the Greyhawk supplement, which was where the different dice really came in. For in the original 3 books, you used a D20 to attack, but you pretty much didn't use the D8, the D4, the D12, any of those. And then they worked that into Greyhawk. So I used Greyhawk, and it was sort of a snapshot of OD&D picked by me at a particular point in time.
Right.
And the reason that I did that was because a guy named Jerry Mapes, who was the original founder of the Knights and Knaves Bulletin Board, he played original D&D. He wanted to see a retro clone of original D&D. And he was basically on his last legs. He's actually passed away now. And so I did it partly for Jerry. And the reason that I didn't use just the 3 books like he played was because what I play in OD&D, or at least what I used to play at that time, was just with the Greyhawk supplement. And then, so we had a version, the core version of Swords and Wizardry, and the versions confuse people a lot. So that was the core. That's my favorite snapshot at that time of original D&D. Then we came out with Swords and Wizardry White Box, which was just the 3 original books. And the reason for that was that a lot of the people who were saying, hey, I want to play for a historical game, let me play what it was originally absolutely like, they liked that sort of stripped down original, we are playing original D&D. It's not actually a version of the game that I favor. A lot of people do. I like it a little bit more complex. But there are a lot of people who do. So we had White Box D&D. Then when we set up Frog God Games, we came out with complete Swords and Wizardry, which was like White Box. It sort of makes more sense than my original version, the snapshot, because we have White Box on the one side, which is just the original 3 books, but then we have complete, which is all of the material that was produced for original Dungeons and Dragons, including articles from the Strategic Review, including articles from the Dragon Magazine, as it was called then, rather than just Dragon Magazine.
Yep.
And all of the supplements that were done for it. So what you have with Swords and Wizardry Complete, which is what Frog God sells, you have the moment in time right before things switch over to first edition advanced D&D. It's the whole set of original D&D. So that's where the 3 versions came from. And it was done using the same approach, the retroclone approach, that would create a trademark that publishers could use, Swords and Wizardry. And there's a little short, very easy to follow compatibility license that allows you to say that what you do is compatible with Swords and Wizardry. And in fact, the rules have been used to spin off a large number of games in different genres. There's one called Woodland Warriors, one called, it's not Space Hulks, Hulks and Horrors is what it's called. There was one that was done in the golden age of superheroes. There's a World War II version of it. So lots of spin-offs came from Swords and Wizardry. It was a pretty productive little node of the OSR's advance. I decided to, okay, so one thing that was different from Osric, though, I was watching Osric, and it didn't, it certainly gained traction, but it didn't gain super traction out there. And my take on that was that people like to have a company behind the game, just because of the way that people like to organize themselves. They like to have a company that they're backing as well as that. So I did that with
the past of RPGs, to say the least.
Yeah. And so I actually did that. It was on a for-profit basis, but the profit part was very, very minimal. I mean, the markups were something like 10% over cost rather than 5 times cost, which you see in the normal industry. So that's really how it started out in terms of getting the complete edition out there. Um, having a core base of fans who played it, sort of came from that company approach of having a forum, and the forums
Right.
are all dead now. But that was sort of how the community built up, and then from Frog God it sort of took a different feel to it. It did certainly become more commercial. Production values increased tremendously, and increased production values aren't necessarily something that the fan base of Swords and Wizardry likes, and so that you start to see kind of a split. But that was fine because third-party publishers were continuing to come out with the stuff that really had the old school aesthetic to it, of the black and white.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I mean that's really the history of how it came to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's like I know I'm picking out just the last note that you covered, but I personally really like when anything I get Swords and Wizardry is black and white. I don't know what it is. It's just like it to me. I guess it can be like a major thing to people, but to me it almost seems minor. Going forward, anything I do, like personally, right, I'm actually probably going to do it the Swords and Wizardry version black and white, and then the 5e version or whatever be in color.
Yeah.
Because
there's a real value. There's a real
Yeah.
value to the black and white aesthetic that I mean, I think is not one that people are particularly trained to see unless they are my age. But there's a definite different feel to seeing something in black and white. It's like you're looking into the world via a book about the world that sort of uses the same technology as the world, but it's got rules and things in there. But it's looking at it sort of at one remove. You're seeing pictures of monsters that could be coming from that sort of world.
Yeah.
Whereas in the color illustrations, you are looking, I think, more directly into that world because you're seeing it, in color. It's more immediate. But it's also got a little bit less of that archaic feel to it. So I think you've just got two groups of people that are seeing it. I think that, folks that are, 35 and under call it, which I think is right the target, right about the millennial generation.
I've said this in more than one video. I'm not a millennial. I'm not a millennial. I think I'm Gen Z. Anyway.
Well, and it doesn't really matter where the generation falls. It's just that, at a certain point you see outside media that has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons shifting more toward a sort of color approach, a more immediate approach. And so, the people who are older are more used to, reading books and things that had the line art in it because that was way easier to publish back then. And so there's more of I think an intuitive lack of a problem with seeing things that are in black and white, whereas it's more of a sort of jarring step, I think, for in general for people who are younger.
Yeah. No, I would entirely agree. And I want to take a moment real quick before we move on to the next topic. This is the Swords and Wizardry Complete Rulebook that Matt was talking about. Everyone has heard this in every video I post, but go to the Frog God Games website. You can download the PDF there. It's pay as you want. Obviously, every time I say this, I recommend paying some money. But
okay, I don't. Here's what I did when I was talking to John Barnhouse, who's been
I had a feeling you would come in.
I told him, look, pay what you want is fine, but this is free.
Yeah.
Because and so he may have even removed the pay what you want.
I think it's still there. The last time I still checked
on there. Well, that's because John didn't get on it, so I'll get on him about that. But, the thing is, there's two different messages with pay what you want versus free, and I want people to see it free. It's something that you can get, that you can use. There's no expectation at all, that anyone's going to pay for it. So.
I'm glad you cleared that. See, having you on has been already very valuable for me personally as the content creator. So yeah, go to the Frog God Games website, top link in the description, every single video, and pick up your free copy of Swords and Wizardry Complete Rulebook. Okay, so we just talked about how Swords and Wizardry came to be. I want to take like a couple minutes real quick and talk about sort of where it's at right now in a twofold question, completely separate though. First off, I want to get your sort of like your thoughts on Mythrus Tower and sort of how that came to be. Because I have been asked that at conventions a couple times.
Right.
So if you can just give us like a little bit on what that is and what people have to do to participate in that kind of stuff.
Okay.
That's
So
really
Mythrus Tower started out pretty much entirely separate from Swords and Wizardry, except that I was using Swords and Wizardry for it. But it was the idea that, because the thing is, I don't much like one-off convention games.
Yes.
Some of them are awesome, but if we're talking about, the ones that I enjoy the most are the ones that are weird, as opposed to being just, sort of gaming. Regardless of who wrote it or how good it is, it just doesn't quite catch with me, because I'm one of the people who likes to take a character and build it up to higher levels. That's my thing. It's not so much the, I guess I'm not so big on the journey. I don't know, but
yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
So I like to build up a character that's going to get better. And so when I was running convention games at North Texas, I was like, well, how can you capture that at a convention? And so the answer was, and at the time, the idea was just within that one convention, people could play in my game, and then their character would get the experience. They would keep the magic items. They could level up, and then there were a couple of other games later in the convention. Now that's turned into a living, breathing campaign, because there are several other DMs that do adventures in that same world, and enough so that people who go to a couple of conventions a year are likely to have a character level up, once or twice over the course of that year, which means you've got long gaps between the sessions, but you're actually getting that experience of bringing up a character that you can be proud of. And so that was really how that started, was that the idea was only a nugget of what it became and turned into.
Okay.
So cool. That's what Mythrus Tower is. It's basically an ongoing campaign, using Swords and Wizardry, several DMs running that campaign. You keep your character, you level up, and so on and so forth through that campaign. And at a certain point, a couple of the characters have retired. A couple of them really only work in the high level games. We've had to break out, one high level game for each convention, because you've got characters that are so strong that they could eliminate, all risk and so on for the lower level characters. Or if they don't eliminate the risk, then you've got the issue of Fireball kills everybody but that one person if you make it hard enough for the higher level characters. So we do that sort of as a sideline, but that's what Mythrus Tower is.
Yeah. So so it's kind of like the organized play. Correct me if I'm wrong, because that term is thrown around a lot.
Yeah, well, what we're sort of starting to call it now is the disorganized play program.
Okay, that's right.
There are very few rules on the people who are doing the DMing. Very few rules on the players. Hang on just a second.
No worries.
There are very few rules on the DM, very few rules on the players, and it sort of moves on. But the thing is that at many conventions, and I'm sure it's a small subset of conventions, but you pick the right ones, there are going to be multiple games in Mythrus Tower that are running there.
Yeah.
And and the campaign's open, really. People who are playing in their home game can bring characters from their home game to the convention as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very cool. I just wanted to, throw that out there for anyone who's looking to go to conventions, or you do go to conventions and you weren't aware of Mythrus Tower. You get the opportunity to play with Matt, which is obviously amazing. Playing a game system with the game system's creator is like, it's hard to get better than that. Also, Bill Webb runs games. Who are the other DMs? Does Ian McCarty, does he run some games?
Ian McCarty runs some of them. Douglas Zielsdorf runs some of them.
Yeah.
There are other people who do as well. People don't even necessarily tell me. They just let people bring the characters. They level them up. Those people go back in. I'm fine with that.
Disorganized play. There it is.
It's disorganized. That's what it is.
Cool. All right. So the second question I had, and because I get this question a lot, if you can't tell, I get a lot of questions that I don't want to answer. So I'm going to pawn them off on you.
All right. Fair enough.
So another commonly asked question I get is how combat works in Swords and Wizardry, or like what is the best way to optimize combat in Swords and Wizardry. So in short, like sort of however long you want to take to answer it, how do you run combat in Swords and Wizardry when you personally referee it or DM it or GM it?
Okay, well, let me step back a second to say that the reason that people ask that question is because it's vague. And the reason that it's vague is that it's based on original D&D, which really, in the first 3 books, didn't establish certain key factors of combat. They just said refer back to the chainmail system. Well, the chainmail system doesn't import perfectly into D&D. And so you had really a very bizarre initiative system if you tried to take it from a mass combat system and apply that. And then in the later books, they did try and put in an initiative system. It was one that was written by Rob Kuntz. With all due respect to Rob, I think it's a clunky system that comes out from Eldritch Wizardry. And so what I did with Swords and Wizardry was looking back at a bunch of different DMs who played during the day and asking them how they did it. And and also looking back at, for example, the Holmes Blue Book, because that, although it was used as a basic introduction to advanced D&D, it was originally written as a summary codified version of original D&D. Mm-hmm. And you can sort of see that because it doesn't work perfectly with AD&D.
Yeah.
So I took that as being an artifact of OD&D and took the initiative system from that and put it in as one of the options. And I created a bunch of options for how you do it, mm-hmm. which is why it's relevant that you're asking me how I do it, because there are several different options.
Of course.
The picking between the options depends a lot on what you're trying to do with combat. And I think that the descriptions of the various options kind of talk about what the effect is of using this option versus the other ones.
Right.
So I use a different version depending on whether it's a home game with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people, as opposed to one of the large convention games that I run that has more like 20.
Yeah.
So when I'm running a convention game that's got 20 odd people in it, we use a phased system, which is so the way that it works is that it's very much like a war game or a board game. Really, the way that this thing works is that you go through, instead of going person by person in order of character, what you do is you go, for one particular type of action, we're going to go through everybody. Mm-hmm. Then we have the next kind of action in the round, and everybody goes through and does that. And that's based on the Holmes Basic set. So what happens is that first you do spells and missiles and turning, and you shoot around the table, anybody doing spells, missiles, or turning, spells, missiles, or turning. And then you go to the next phase, which is normally the way that I do it is I separate out first movement, then melee. Sometimes the way I do it is just your action. You're either moving or you're fighting, one or the other.
Right.
But that's sort of the melee and movement phase of things, and you shoot around the table doing that. And the reason why that works well at a convention is that it's getting people, instead of a slow movement down around the table as everybody does everything their character is doing, you go all the way around very quickly, then you go all the way around very quickly, so people are doing their thing more often or more frequently during that round. So it works well for a convention. And by breaking it down also, you tend to get quicker answers from people about what they're doing. And so that works really well for convention games. That starts to get a little difficult to follow, though, when you've got like 5 players, for example.
That's what I found as well. Yeah.
Right. For whatever reason, what is simple with a large number of people gets clunky with a small number of people. I'm not sure why.
Almost like backwards.
Yeah, it is. It's not intuitive that would happen, but it does. And so when I'm playing with a smaller number of people, I tend to go character by character, and I go in the initiative system that I still use is going in dexterity order, and I roll a dexterity for the monsters rather than rolling an initiative thing, and that way it easily takes high dexterity into account in the round. But it goes person by person, and of course all the monsters go at once. So one effect of that is that usually many of the characters are going before the monsters because you're rolling a straight 3d6.
Yeah.
But that's okay. That's why See, because when people do character generation, I allow them to move stats around. They still have to roll straight d6, no bonuses, no 4d6 drop the lowest or anything like that. But they can switch where they go around, because I think it's important that people are able to decide what kind of character they want to play.
Yeah.
The real official way of doing it is that you just you play what you roll up. But I think that the way that these games operate sort of in the modern world is that you ought to be able to pick who you're going to be. So I changed that around.
No, I do the same thing actually with rolling of stats. We roll our stats and then sort of assign them. But I, like you, and more, even if I'm playing 5e, we sometimes just do 3d6 straight, because I don't know, I think it's the way to go. Because I really like how the beginning of the like character creation is worded. It's not sort of like you're not these heroes out of the gate. You have to earn it, and you have to journey through it and level up to it. But the thing I like most about Swords and Wizardry, I think, is, and to some people this might seem minor, or they just might skip over it the most, or might skip over it, is how it's so often says, this is the way that it was intended, or this is the way that it's written, but your referee may change this, or your referee may do this instead.
Right.
I
Absolutely.
really like how that's constantly in the book. Some books do it, some other game editions do it, but not nearly, I think, as much as I've read it in Swords and Wizardry, which I think is a really important point, because combat, or whatever part of the game you may be talking about, is not going to be the same at every table at all. It's going to change very often, and obviously the referee sort of has the final say in how everything is ran. So I think that's cool. So just to sort of summarize again, in convention games you do phases. So like you do missile spells first, and then you kind of work down to melee and such. And then at home games or smaller group games, you sort of do it by player with initiative systems based on dexterity, which is obviously a very common theme in RPGs. Cool. Well, that will definitely help out a lot of people who have been asking that question.
All right.
So now I want to talk about, we've talked about the origin of Swords and Wizardry. We've sort of talked a little bit about where it is now. Now I want to talk about where it's going, because I think I hinted at it at the beginning of the video, and I think people have anticipated this conversation for a while, or at least hoped for this conversation to have for a while. But I'm going to let you take the reins on this one, obviously, because you are the head honcho. The question that I had worded is there any future plans for Swords of Wizardry? And for those who are on Facebook or listen to certain podcasts, you may have heard some whisperings of plans with Swords of Wizardry. So Matt, I'll let you go ahead and talk about what the future holds for this game system.
All right. Well, I mean, this is still sort of at the leaking information point, because we really we did have this plan leak out into the community, and we still haven't put together any sort of official, this is what we're going to do.
So let's clarify real quick that this isn't like the official statement or anything, right? This is just sort of unofficially, we're just having a conversation.
Right? Well, we're just, I can certainly talk about what the plans are. We'll see to what extent the details shift around.
Sure.
But the idea is that, first of all, we're going to keep the complete rule book out there. There are a lot of people who like having a book and being able to put it on a shelf and so on. But we've had a lot of people ask for a box set over time. And we haven't been able to do that cost effectively until now. And I don't know why that is. It's either that, Bill was able to get good deals, or that prices have shifted on paper or binding or art or any of the components. But we're looking at this being something that makes, that'll cover its costs and probably make us some profit as well. It is not any sort of a new edition or a revision of the game itself, because now there is an element of that is going to come into it, but the box set and all of Swords and Wizardry is based upon original D&D. That's something that happened in the past.
Yeah.
So it's set. I can't, for it to be what it is, I don't want to change it. On the other hand, there are, and so that's the box set. It's going to be the complete rule book, you know, maybe some errata, so on and so forth. But what is going to come along with that is going to be a specific Swords and Wizardry product line.
Okay.
Again, this is the plan. And so the and the other thing to point out is the plan is this is going to be digest sized. It's not going to be letter size. So the box is going to be your actual, you know, OD&D size box.
That I did not know that part. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's the plan. And then it's going to be soft cover saddle stitch books inside. And there was some discussion about that because perfect binding in a lot of cases is actually cheaper nowadays. There's some weird things happening in the printing costing industry, but the saddle stitch books stay flat more than that. So I tend to prefer using saddle stitch books at an actual gaming table. They're terrible on a shelf, but that's why a box is good, because then you just put them in your box, put the box on the shelf, you can still see where it is. So that's a good combination of stuff. And so then we're going to come out with not really supplements, but more of a journal, once again in the digest size that'll fit in the box. And what we're going to put in there is optional additional material that will satisfy a lot of people who do want to alter or add complexity to the game or whatever it is. You know, people tinker in different directions when they're doing it, but it's for the tinkerers. And so one of the main things that'll probably be in there is monsters, because everybody likes to have more monsters. Monstrosities is out of print, so we'll probably bring in a lot of the monsters from Monstrosities, you know, for this sort of supplement. But it'll also include, you know, things like that. I mean, that discussion we just had about initiative is fairly well contained in the book, but you know, things like that, you know, the movement system sucks. And so we'll probably have, here's an alternate movement system, you know, that more, you know, that benefits from all of the years of game design that have gone into it. This is something that works in a somewhat more streamlined fashion than it did, you know, right when they were inventing this stuff for the first time. They didn't absolutely hit the nail on the head with every single specific of the thing. I mean, they certainly hit the nail on the head in terms of the total game. So this is sort of, you know, it's going to be monster resources. It's going to be a tinkerer's box. It may have a couple of articles in there. That's something we're very much not sure about, is whether to make it feel more like a periodical or feel more like the supplements. You know, that's still something that's up in the air. But so there will be products following on this that will be useful for people who want to see the, you know, more about the game itself in rules form.
Okay, cool. So basically what you're doing is adding options. You know, you're giving more options, sort of what it sounds like, to add on, to expand to the game. The game is still staying core. You know, it's not going to, you know, change really much at all, which I think is a very noble thing to do. I will say that right now, because as we're all aware, you know, there have been sort of botches in new editions of games, you know, not mentioning any specifically, but I think the core of Swords and Wizardry is perfect because it gives you a base. And the beauty of RPG games is you sort of imagine the hell out of the rest of it.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that when you come out with a new edition of rules where you're supposedly updating them and improving them, and it's not retro compatible with the stuff you've done before, that's a strategy for making a lot of money. Rule sets tend to do better than supplements for rule sets in terms of profitability and sales and so on and so forth. So there is always, I think, for any publishing company, the that always there, you know, fact that you've got a lot of money that you're leaving on the table by not doing a new edition. But with Swords and Wizardry, you know, first off, you know, I do think that mostly that's kind of a cash grab situation. And I just, you know, and Swords and Wizardry is not my design, it's Gary Gygax's design. It's just reworded so that people can use it, you know, in the economy, basically. And so it's not my place really to say, hey, I've got, you know, this updated, you know, improved version.
Yeah, improved. Wow. Yeah.
Right, but it is my place to come out with options for playing it, because, you know, I've been playing it for a really long time, and I think that, you know, every every game or every DM certainly is going to tinker with things, and so a tinkering toolbox for things is something that I think is okay for Swords and Wizardry, as long as everyone keeps in mind that that can lead to different tables not being so compatible with each other because of the rules they use, and then the subsequent statement of that's okay.
Yeah, that is okay. This is a role play. This is a tabletop game. It's not supposed to have a specific, algorithm to it. Sort of, like how you see in like video games or online gaming.
Right, and it's not chess.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going to have tournaments,
Mm-hmm. So awesome. So that being said, like, if someone has bought, like maybe a campaign or an adventure for Swords and Wizardry, the current Swords and Wizardry game, that will be, usable with this new
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no changes, not
awesome.
even to the text. I mean, what we're doing is we're breaking out the text into sections, that since we've got to have 4 books that are roughly equivalent length, there's going to be some artistry in terms of how it gets moved around, to be the most usable in this format with this breakdown. So I guess some of the text may move around in terms of some of the paragraph orders or where something is, and that's not something we've gotten to yet, so I don't know how much that's going to be, if any. But all of the text is planned to be in there, and none of it is going to have any substantive changes unless it is cleaning something up that's been a problem in one of the earlier editions that people just couldn't understand what I was saying in it. Some of the ambiguities are left in there because they were in there in the original version, so those we're not trying to clear up. We will probably try and identify them more as being a deliberate ambiguity. This is something that simply wasn't clear in the edition that we're working from, and therefore you pick, and often we put in options for it. But there's no real rewriting going on in this one. It's going to be absolutely usable back and forth. There's no changes to the system whatsoever.
Awesome. Well, that'll answer a lot of questions that I've been posed very often. And like I said, we were talking pre-show, and I was just saying how, number one, I really appreciate everyone watching the Swords and Wizardry videos. They get the most interactions and have the best analytics out of any of the videos that we put out. And I think that says a lot about the game system itself. And the people who play it. Yeah, exactly. The community around it's amazing. I really, really enjoy the Swords and Wizardry community, and that's what pushed me to do. We're doing currently one of the series we're doing is teaching Swords and Wizardry. So I'm going through like every part of the book and making 20, 25-minute videos on how to play the game. Especially for the people that have always wanted to play it, maybe that haven't had a chance to, or just haven't dove into the rules yet, which, as we talked about earlier, if you go to conventions, you could play it with Matt Finch with Mythrus Tower, which is obviously always an amazing option. But I think that pretty much wraps it up here for us. I think that was a really good conversation, talking about where Swords of Wizardry came from, where it's today, and then where it's going to be, which is so awesome that we're finally able to like talk about what's going on with the future of it. So anything else from you, Matt? Anything else you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you divided it out into 3 good, even-sized sections, and we'll see how well we can do that with the complete rule book. It's going to be 4 little books.
There you go, 4 little books in the box too. Like, honestly, I'm more pumped up about that than anything.
A lot of people love boxes. People love boxes. People love digest-sized books. It's and it hasn't really been economically feasible. And then for whatever reason, we're now Bill costed it out, and he's like, yeah, okay, this works now. So
yeah, that's awesome. Well, we're all happy that it got to where it was eventually, and we're all excited for it. Obviously, like we said, this is just sort of like an unofficial conversation with you guys. Just keep your eyes peeled for official statements that are going to come out and official news that's going to break from Frog God Games about and the future outcome of this game system. So thank you all so much for watching. If you did like the video, leave a like on it. And if you have any other questions about Swords and Wizardry or want to talk about maybe predictions on what some supplementary stuff is going to be that's going to come out, leave that in the comment section down below. That's always my favorite place to hang out and talk to you guys.
Actually, in addition to predictions, put down stuff you'd like to see in those supplements, because the content of them is not set. If somebody has a good suggestion for something, that this will give us a chance to pick up on it and maybe put it in there.
Cool. Yeah. So totally throw down your recommendations in the comments. That'll be super fun to read and interact with. Maybe some people can even put some ideas together to form like a super idea. That'd be awesome. Subscribe if you are not already. Like I've said a million times, at 1,000 subscribers, we're doing a giveaway. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And that's it from us. Thank you again, Matt, for taking time out of your day to join me. This has been, amazing. And I'm glad that we were able to bring out the most anticipated interview of the Frog God channel. Keep those rolls and spirits high, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.